So initially, I was actually working in research in a cognitive science lab, and I had become a Christian at the last year in college, my last year in college, and then I was working in a lab the following year. And I had a dream where Jesus appeared and he told me that he was calling me to seminary, and it was very clear. And I did resist it a little bit, despite how clear it was. But I eventually went to seminary, and to be completely honest, I had no idea what God was calling me to do with my degree in seminary. I had thought maybe I would go into chaplaincy. I really wasn't sure. And to be honest, pastoral ministry was not at all on my radar. And it wasn't until I was taking a Greek course that a friend in the class, who is actually here today, had been promoted to lead pastor of his church, and he asked me to interview for the associate pastor position. And I was absolutely terrified because it really hadn't been on my radar at all. I had not thought that God was calling me to pastoral ministry, and so it kind of came as a surprise. And then when I got the job, I realized that that really was what God was calling me to. And so I had to kind of adjust my expectations and start to see myself as someone who has leadership potential, which I think I hadn't really seen in myself before. And so it was a big adjustment, and there's been a lot of growing and learning throughout the process. But I absolutely love what I'm doing. And it's been, the more time that I spend as an associate pastor, the more clear it becomes to me that this really is a good fit for me, and that this was the right decision. And I'm continually blessed by being in pastoral ministry. It's been amazing. So I'm really grateful to be here today and talk a little bit about how we can reopen children's ministry safely and effectively. So that's a little bit about me. I'm at the Refinery Church, which is in Chula Vista in San Diego. And we used to be called First Baptist Church, but it's now the Refinery. So it's a small church. We have about 60 adults, maybe like 15 kids. Okay. So really small, intimate, which has been really nice, such a blessing, because I really get to know the congregation and have recently gotten to really know the kids really well. So that's a little bit about us. So I titled this presentation, The Return After the Exile, kind of a metaphor for what we're going to be going through in the coming months and what a lot of us have already started to feel like we're going through. So I wanted to first share a little bit of a personal story about how our church has handled COVID and how that's impacted our children's ministry. So first of all, we have a children's ministry director, and as the associate pastor, I supervise her and help her and guide her and mentor her, but I don't necessarily directly interact with the children normally. But our children's ministry director lives with high risk people, and so for the last year, she hasn't felt safe returning to the church, even when the tiers allowed us to resume meeting either outside or even inside. So basically for the last year, we haven't really had a children's ministry director, and we've also lost a lot of our volunteers who haven't felt safe to return. And so that's been really challenging because we've basically had to rebuild our program from the ground up. But it's also been a blessing for me personally because I've been able to directly interact with the kids and be more hands-on. Whereas before, when I was just in more of a supervisory role, I didn't really get to know the children or the volunteers as well. So this is actually, for me personally, it's been a blessing, but it's been challenging too. And probably a lot of you can relate to that as well. And then I wanted to share a little bit about how we've adjusted to all the different regulations that we've had to deal with. So we have begun the process of rebuilding our children's ministry program, but we've had to make a lot of adjustments along the way. So for instance, when we were in the highest risk tier, we were just, when there was the stay-at-home order, we were just providing downloadable packets and videos for the kids to watch at home. And so we did know that families were actually downloading the packets and printing them out and having the kids do the activities at home, and they were watching the videos. So the kids were getting their needs met to some extent, but we don't know how much less effective that is than actually being in person and meeting in groups. And then when we were allowed to resume meeting in person, but outside, we would have packets for the kids to color in, or they could do, puzzles or things like that in the service. So we would have them stay in the service with their parents. And then we started trying to recruit new volunteers. And so we started having the kids meet outside, but we had very limited curriculum because we were just really starting to rebuild our children's ministry program. So it really ended up being a lot more like babysitting, unfortunately, for a few weeks as we got kind of our ducks lined up. And then in the last 2 months, we've really started to revamp our children's ministry program now that we can meet inside again. And so we have revamped a lot of it. We are using our old curriculum, and the kids are getting a much higher quality program now, thankfully, but we're still not fully there. We had to completely find new volunteers. So basically every volunteer that is serving now is a new volunteer that we hadn't used before. So that's been a little bit of adjustment for the children and for us too, and for the volunteers, of course. And so this whole process, probably as all of you can attest to, has required flexibility, creativity, and a go with the flow attitude. And I think we're going to need to continue to be adaptable after things settle down more, and even after vaccines become widely available, because I don't think everything's going to just completely go back to normal. So I wanted to pose this question to all of us, which is, where are we at spiritually? And I think the answer to this question can be found in the Bible, because I think this has been kind of like an exile for us. And the Bible actually documents the Israelite exile and what happened when the exiles returned home. And so we can learn a lot by looking at this account. So I want to take some time and just talk about what happened in the Babylonian exile. So just a little bit of history. In 597 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon attacked Jerusalem, conquered it, and took the king and all of the most elite of the society away to exile in Babylon. And you can see that in 2 Kings 24:10 through 17. And then 10 years later, in 587 BC, Nebuchadnezzar returned. He destroyed the temple and the walls. He abolished the kingship, and he took another group of exiles to Babylon. And so between those 10 years, it was pretty much life as usual for most of the people of Judah, because they still had a temple, a king, in their normal way of life. But for the group of exiles in Babylon, things were really different, completely different, because they had been taken away from the land God had given to his people. They couldn't go to the temple, the place where God was most present, the place where they felt like they could worship God. And they were cut off from most of their people, and they were isolated in this foreign land. And so probably a lot of questions came to mind to them about their identity and their faith in God. So then the question is, well, how are we in exile, or how have we been in exile? And I think there's a lot of parallels between what the Israelites went through and what we have been going through for the past year. Many people have been displaced from their regular, normal worship in church. Many of us have been isolated from our communities, unable to really leave the house. And we too have had to make some major adjustments and adapt to life with COVID. And I would say, and I really believe, that our health as a ministry depends on how well we adapt to the challenges that life puts in our way. So how adaptable we are, how flexible and creative we are, is going to determine how successful we are. So I also wanted to read this passage from Jeremiah 29, and some of you will be really familiar with it, but I think this is a really important passage for what we're going through, because Jeremiah was one of the prophets who was prophesying to the exiles and to the people that were still in Judah, explaining what God's words were to them in this period of exile. And so we can learn a lot about God's wishes and will for us when we're in an exile from this passage. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it for us. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When the 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me, and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and the places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I have carried you into exile. So it's a really kind of beautiful passage. It's a passage that speaks hope in the midst of what probably was a time of despair. And I want to just share a couple reflections from Jeremiah 29 that we can apply to our situation. So first of all, we know from that very famous verse, Jeremiah 29:11, that God has good plans for the exiles. He's not trying to harm them. And although we need to be careful about how we apply this to our situation, I think we can also safely say that God has good plans for our children's ministry program in our churches. God wanted the exiles to adapt to their new circumstances. He told them to marry and to have their sons and daughters marry and to seek the prosperity of the land that they were in and to build homes. God wanted them to adapt to this life that they now faced. And so God is calling us to be flexible and creative too. And then another important point is that there was an end to the exile. It was going to go on for a long time, for 70 years, but there was a definite ending. And I think that we can also probably safely say that although life will definitely be altered after COVID, I'm hoping and praying and believing that there is going to be an end to it too. So now I think we're getting to the point where we're not really necessarily in the exile as much as we were maybe say a year ago. Now we're more in we're getting closer to post-exilic life. So we can see what the Israelites went through as they returned to their home from Ezra 1-6. So there were a couple major things that changed that are actually long-lasting changes in the Jewish faith because of the exile. For instance, worship was completely changed after the exiles returned home. Because the temple was destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar, synagogues emerged. So there was they were kind of like almost like home churches that were developed. And the Israelites learned to worship in synagogues rather than at the central location of the temple. And because the temple didn't exist, and that was where animal sacrifices were performed, there was more of an emphasis on reading the Torah rather than performing animal sacrifices. And these are actually changes that have continued to exist in the Jewish faith since then. I mean, it actually permanently altered the way Jewish people worshiped God. So we too should expect that there are going to be some lasting changes in the way that we do children's ministry and church in general. So I wanted to just give us a little bit of time to share. How do you think that children's ministry might be different after the coronavirus exile that we've been facing? So if anyone has any ideas about how this might be different, what ways we're going to need to change things, I would love to hear it. So I'll just open it up for a discussion.
One thing that we're considering at the church is offering a more hybrid program where some of the kids might be there present with us and some of the kids might be zooming in. One thing that was very clear is that there was, excuse me, with allergies, there were 7 or 8 of our kids that their parents drove in from a fairly long distance, from half an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. And so when we were doing the Zoom programs, we got to see the kids a lot more than if we were doing it in person. So to kind of figure out how we could reach those children that are a little bit further away, but yet their family has chosen to remain part of the community at Free Baptist Church of Redlands. So we're looking into that.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great observation.
Cheryl, are you thinking of live streaming?
I don't know. I need to get my tech people together. I was kind of thinking more of like a Zoom format with all of this, but I don't know. That has to be worked out by those who are much younger than I am and much more knowledgeable, and then they teach me. Anyone else doing something?
Okay, well, we'll move on, and that's something to just keep in mind, even after we're done with this presentation, is just, you know, something to continually reflect on, like what are some lasting changes that we might need to make to our children's ministry programs. So I also want to take a moment and just reflect on how our kids and our families are doing, especially the kids. I would venture to say that a lot of them, or at least many of them, are spiritually, academically, and socially malnourished from this last year. And I actually did a little bit of research into physical malnourishment and found that, as many of you might already know, you can't just take a child who is physically malnourished and put them on a normal diet and assume that everything will be fine and they'll go back to normal. They need to be given smaller amounts of food in the beginning. They need to be given softer foods so as to not upset their stomach. And I think we can apply that to the spiritual as well. I think a lot of our kids, they might not be getting a lot of spiritual nourishment at home. And if they haven't been coming to church and getting nourished from our children's ministry programs, then they might be lacking a lot of spiritual nourishment. And so it might be the case that we're going to need to start our programs with a little bit more of a diet of milk rather than solid food. So we might want to begin with foundational truths, like just very basic, simple truths like God loves me, Jesus is my best friend, I can pray to God, I can turn to the Bible, just really, really basic stuff that you might expect your kids to already know, but that they might need reminders about. So I think that's important. And then just some tips and suggestions. Some parents, as we probably all know, some parents are really lax about COVID and others are hyper vigilant. And it can be hard to feel like you're trying to meet the needs of parents that are coming from completely different positions. But regardless, we need to make sure that we're abiding by the CDC guidelines. And we do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, most importantly, it keeps our children safe and our volunteers safe, but also it will put anxious parents at ease and will perhaps educate parents who don't take COVID as seriously. So we really need to make sure that we're still abiding by CDC guidelines. And then I would also say we want to be patient with children who might be less well-behaved as they return to church and to our children's programs, because some of them haven't been in school for over a year. Some of them haven't been to church for over a year. And some of them might have forgotten, as we mentioned before, foundational basic truths about God. And so we just need to be really patient with our kids as they start to come back. And I would say also we want to be really loving and warm, because COVID has been stressful for a lot of families. It's really put a strain on the parents and it's been hard for the kids. So we just want to make sure that we're being a place where the kids feel welcome and loved and accepted. And then just some practical tips regarding classroom management. I've noticed recently that our kids have been a little bit rowdier than usual as we've put them back in a classroom. And so we've needed to be creative in the ways that we get their attention and manage the classroom, because we don't want it to be just this unruly, crazy environment. We want to make sure that it's a calm environment for our kids. So we're working on that personally, our churches. And then we also allow outdoor play time at the end of lessons, just because we feel like it's important for the kids to get to play together. And also because it's good for them to get their energy out. And a lot of times it just seems like they have a lot more energy than they did before the pandemic. And we're also starting to implement more reinforcement for good behavior, just because we are seeing a little bit more behaviors than usual. So what we're going to start doing is awarding one child per Sunday a good behavior award, just to kind of incentivize them to try to sit still and listen and be patient and everything. And then in terms of safety concerns, I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but we want to make sure we're wearing masks and having our teachers and our kids wear masks until the CDC says otherwise. It's really tempting with the vaccines coming out right now to just be really lax about the masks, but it's really important that we continue to have the kids and the families and the parents and teachers wearing masks. Then also we want to make sure that if we're having the kids come back into a classroom, that we are sanitizing all the rooms. And I would recommend putting away the toys for now, because otherwise you're going to have to sanitize every single toy after each Sunday. And that's a lot of work for our volunteers or our directors or pastors to do. So it just makes sense to put the toys away for now. And I also recommend keeping a checklist of things to clean, so that the volunteers or directors can make sure that they're cleaning everything they need to clean, and not cleaning things that have already been cleaned, but also not forgetting to clean things that haven't been cleaned. So just having a checklist is a really, really good idea. And then we want to try to plan activities that limit contact for now. So for instance, a game of Duck, Duck, Goose, even though it's really fun for the kids, is probably not a good game to play right now, until really the vaccine is readily available and the CDC says we can. And then if you are a director or a pastor, as you plan to reopen children's ministry, I would suggest involving multiple people in your decision. So you might want to begin by calling or sending a survey to each of the families in your church and the volunteers in order to gauge their interests and their readiness to return, because we don't want to reopen before families and volunteers are ready to return. That would not be a good situation. And there's precedence for this in the Bible too. The Bible says that there is wisdom in a multitude of counselors in Proverbs 11:14. So we want to make sure that we're involving multiple people in our decisions and that we're making sound and wise decisions. And then this next tip is something that our church has really had to implement because of the loss of volunteers that we've had. So you want to really make sure to start recruiting volunteers as soon as possible, because we need leaders and volunteers for this next reopening phase. And like I mentioned before, in our case, we had to basically completely redo our program in terms of our volunteer base. We had to find completely new volunteers. So you may not be able to count on the same people to teach in children's ministry as before. So you want to begin this process, I would say at least a few weeks before we're planning to really reopen. Just reach out to old volunteers, see if they're willing to come back, and then if not, start promoting it from the front. See if your pastors are willing to start promoting involvement in children's ministry. And then I would also say, don't bite off more than you can chew. If you only have enough volunteers to have children's ministry 2 Sundays a month, just start there. That's actually something that my church is going to be doing in the coming weeks. We're hoping to revamp our toddlers program. Right now, we've only been doing elementary age children. We probably are not going to have enough volunteers to do a full toddlers program 4 Sundays a month. And so we're going to just start with 2 Sundays a month. And I think that's a good place to start. We really want to make sure that we're not overworking our volunteers. Having one volunteer take 3 to 4 Sundays a month to help out in children's ministry every month probably isn't a good idea, because they're going to get burnt out, and they're already taking a risk by coming back to serve. So we really don't want to overwork them. So make sure that you have enough volunteers to really make sure you can have the program start up again without overworking them. And as we reopen, we're going to want to start having events for our children and really have a really enriching program naturally. But I would say for now, we want to focus just on essentials. Now is not the time to plan elaborate, large children's ministry events. We want to first focus on just getting a regular Sunday program going again, and then go from there. And once we've established a regular Sunday program, then we can think about starting to add other events and think of creative ways to meet the needs of our children. So that's something you can do after you've already established a solid Sunday morning children's ministry program. So that's all I have for us. So I thought we would just end with a little bit of discussion time. So my question for us two questions to think about is, how has your children's ministry program adapted in the age of COVID? And then also, do you have any tips you can share about reopening children's ministry, or any challenges you face that you want to talk about?
This was using a curriculum called the Meeting House. It's actually free, and we really like it because it's multicultural, and my congregation is very multicultural, so the kids are well represented in the whole curriculum. It's from the Meeting House. That's right. What we did was we were using that before the quarantine. So we were able to adapt that to online Zoom. And that's basically what we've been doing since September, since I started this ministry. I think because we were using the curriculum in person, it might be that when we come back, we will probably use the same curriculum, although I like the idea of adding some outdoor play and some things like that. But it does have a video element, and as long as the teacher can manage both Zoom and in person, that's kind of that hybrid that Cheryl was talking about. And then the other thing that Cheryl inspired me to do back when I started in the fall was every month I send out a packet to the families, and I write a letter to the parents, trying to give them some lessons about parenting and help them to help their kids learn some of the lessons that are focused on in the Sunday school. And usually there's a craft for the kids to do. Some of the crafts have been, they can do it on their own, and some of them require their parents' help depending upon the age of the child.
That's great. Yeah, that sounds like that was really effective. And I think it's so important to get the parents and the families involved. One of the curriculum that my church is using, which is Orange, does a pretty good job of involving families in the learning of the kids. And I think that's so important. So good for you for doing that. Anyone else have anything that they would like to share?
This was about format. I talked with our senior pastor just the other day, how to roll out what we were hoping to do. So the first rollout will be the nursery, toddler, preschool. they will not be as easy to incorporate into the church service as the older. And so to get that put together, now I really like the idea of removing all or some of the toys, because you know how churches get hand-me-downs and we get a closet full of toys. And so to maybe just take some out for the younger ones to play on. There are mats and a little slide and things like that that they can do. Fortunate, we have a lawn in front of our church, and we'll be using that a little bit more with some outside play as well, and just better circulation in the rooms, opening up the windows. Now it's going to get really hot coming up here, so we really have to think through, and it does take a lot of people to think about all the details. I'm not particularly a detail person, so we have to think that through first, is more of the child care aspect with the littler ones. And then we were thinking of we have little categories. God's kids is kindergarten through second grade, and so they can actually stay in the service with their family units a little longer for the music and things like that. And then we could set up out on the lawn. We also have a covered area that has sidewalks outside of the Christian ed doors. So we're thinking we could put up some tables for crafts and separate them, and have some little outdoor play. It wouldn't be a full hour because they would be part of the worship service, and then they would come out. So that's just basics. That's not a lot of details. And then for our older kids, our third grade through fifth grade, in the summer, we have a little summer session Sunday school for them. And what we do is we explain, and we have people who come in who are part of the church to explain, well, what is communion? Why do we baptize? What's hospitality? You know, why do we pray? What's the Bible all about? So we have different people in our church who are known for their prayer life or for their Bible study, and to come and talk to the older kids about why it's so important, kind of to bring them into more, help them to understand why the church does what it does. And so we're thinking of they will be the last ones pulled out, and starting with that process. They're easier to control because they are older and they understand the rules and the COVID rules. And so we could actually bring them into a room with safe distancing, and they would be okay. They could handle it. So we're just beginning to think through these things. There's a million little details that we're trying to think through, but just to think through the growth development of our kids and what they're able to handle at this point.
Anyone else?
And Ali, I just want to say that I really appreciated your talk about, being flexible, being creative, and being able to adapt. Because I think we've all had to do this even during the pandemic. And so now that it's going to be post-pandemic, like, what does that look like? Right. We had our first in-person service on Easter of all times. Mm-hmm. And so, which was really great to see, familiar faces or even some new faces. And we opened it up to families. But the thing is, we had no families, no elementary, younger, attending our Easter service. And when I asked parents why, it's because one parent said that there was a strict, a guideline for everyone to wear their masks correctly, and to have a child, in service wearing their mask, and they're fidgety and things like that. I'm sure that kids will get used to it because they're going to go to school and things like that, like wearing a jacket. But to enforce that, in a service, for an hour service, for a child to do that, it's kind of hard. And the second one was because they wanted to go to their online Sunday school, class, because they see their friends and things like that. So then, what does it look like now? And I feel like I'm in the same position as you, that we have older volunteers, and they want to make sure that it's safe when they come back. And so I feel like for our early childhood, we have no volunteers right now, that we have to start thinking about that and recruiting and getting maybe the more younger, young marrieds or college, high school, all those kids, trying to, help out with the volunteer base. But we're also thinking about too, what does it look like? Because you're going to have parents and even volunteers of different spectrums about safety. And so, I have some families that they're not going to take the vaccine, or volunteers, both. Are they going to take the vaccine, or they're not going to take the vaccine? What does it look like? Because we're not like a school that says, okay, all your volunteers have to have a vaccine, and it's also personal decision. So, what does that kind of look like for the church as well? And then maybe also kind of thinking about starting small, of having early childhood up to elementary with whatever base that I have of volunteers, to start small. And then as soon, people get more comfortable, that they see the vaccine is working, then to open it up a little bit bigger. But, just because the church is going to open in person, it's not that easy to say, okay, children's ministry, you're going to open up the same time too. And some of our volunteers, they teach their Sunday school before the service so that they can attend the live stream while we're in person. If they taught first service, that they could go to second service and flip flop. So, we're kind of thinking about that as well. Like, when is the best time to have, kids church or Sunday school? So those are just kind of the things that I was kind of processing as you're talking, but you were giving really sound advice too. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, and actually, just to respond to what you said about the your concern about having enough volunteers for the younger ones, the toddlers and everything. What our church is planning on doing is actually, so we don't know if this will work yet because we haven't actually done it. But what we're planning on doing is basically telling the young married couples, hey, if you want a place, if you want childcare for your child during the service, you're going to have to volunteer once a month and help out in the room and help the other kids. So we're hoping that will be a pretty good incentive to get the young married couples involved. But yeah, it's really hard. We're in a really interesting time, and so again, just being flexible, being creative, using critical thinking skills. These are all things that we're having to do. And I think it's making us stronger as a ministry. Ultimately, I think that God is strengthening us through this process. Yeah. So thanks for your feedback and for what you shared. Anyone else?
Ali, thank you very much for all these good information. I really find that one thing that you said helpful to me a lot was easy start. Yeah. I noticed that because when we had that Easter service this last week outdoor, I had almost half of the kids that didn't join us on the Zoom throughout this whole year. Anyhow, I decided to have a little Bible quiz, a game played, and I felt bad because the other half that didn't attend kind of felt a little bit left out. So that really gives me an idea how to do it to do the easy start
Mhm.
part. And also another one that I realized is that the kids that were not joining in the Zoom prior, they kind of like excluding themselves kind of out of the
Mm.
group that has been. And I'm wondering, do you have any little idea where I can bring them all back together, where they can all be the same, like a group in a team kind of, in a way, you know?
So you're saying the kids that are joining online are not able to interact with the kids that are in person? Is that what you were saying?
I kind of started seeing that, you know, because they have been seeing on Zoom most of the time, the kids that are, they kind of roll away on their own little group kind of.
Okay.
And then the one that hasn't been attending, they were just kind of sitting on their own. And I'm just like, I don't know how to approach that to bring them back together, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'd actually love to open it up to everyone who's here, because we all have wisdom and things to offer. So does anyone have any suggestions for Katrina?
Well, I'm a retired public school teacher, so partner different kids up. Those have been on Zoom, those who haven't, that they've become a partner with each other, and they have the opportunity to build friendships. But you know, especially with children, the more opportunity you have for them to get out of a structured environment and encourage play. And I like what was said about start soft, start, you know, don't start with milk, um, to build those relationships again. Um, and it will take a while, and it, you kind of need to guide them, and sometimes engineer little groups for the kids to get to know each other, and that's what I have.
Thank you, thank you.
I think, you know, having a simple question like, what did you like about your Easter? You know, and I had the same idea as Cheryl. You could have somebody on Zoom paired off with somebody in the class, and they could take turns, you know, talking to each other with everyone else respectfully listening. You know, again, just to mix it up. A lot of times kids want to connect, but they just don't know how to do it. So I do agree with Cheryl that we need to kind of structure it at times.
Yeah, I think these are great ideas. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else have anything that you'd like to share about either the challenges that you've faced, any tips that you have, any ways that you think your ministry is going to continue to be impacted by COVID?
It's going to be impacted. There's so many different opinions out there. I'm playing around with some ideas, especially with the older kids, because usually I focus more of my energy on them as they are preparing for youth. And so I see myself as I'm the bridge for the youth group. And it's really important to get those kids across that bridge into the youth program, because that is so important, the youth groups. I don't work with youth, but I'm preparing them to be youth. And I think the more that we create opportunities for them to safely get together, is going to be so important. Even as you look at adults in church, there are different groups in church, and it's so important to mix that up and to teach community even with adults. And because I'm a bike rider, I'm like, okay, well, maybe we can take the older kids, invite their parents, and we're going to go on a bike ride. Not in the street. We're gonna go on the path where there's no other vehicles. Maybe we can invite a family to a picnic or something like that. So maybe thinking wider in the families, starting there rather than maybe just individual kids, because I know my kids depend on their parents, and if I can get their parents, then the kid follows. And for the families to get to know each other, to feel comfortable with each other. And this is a good time in the summer to do that. They allow things to be more informal, and for you to show that you're safe, because you're proving to them that you have their safety in mind. So you're kind of doing two things. You're working with the parents and you're working with the children, and that's kind of going to be key to part of the strength of the program.